Where
Oh,
were
hey,
you?
Jeff. What's that?
Where were you?
Sorry, man. I was busy changing the battery in my smoke detector.
Smoke
Uh,
detector. Oh,
Chirping. It was chirping incessantly. So yeah, what do we got today, bud?
you changed those?
Uh, yeah. I think that's common sense, isn't it?
Ah, okay. Well, I'm going to show you something, uh, and see what you think about this. There's a fella who thinks it's okay not to change these.
Wrapping it up nicely together in the dying fire alarm, if we can start to understand that the lived experience of low income or impoverished socioeconomic statuses can dysregulate the prefrontal cortex such that the simple task of replacing
Now, did you catch that? The lower socioeconomic classes have a problem with their prefrontal cortex.
it difficult, then we can also start to recognize that living with fire alarms that beep and beep and beep until they die is going to be a more common occurrence in places where people of those socioeconomic statuses are concentrated. And from there, it's as simple as subconsciously connecting the two in our brains without ever realizing it, although often alluding to it. And my name is Drew.
That was Drew. So, Drew is a sociologist or a sociologist in training. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but he seems to think that there is some biological explanation for why some people leave their smoke detectors in
Hmm.
a little chirping mode.
Well, it sounds. I'm trying to. So it sounds like Drew drew some conclusions that seem a little bit precarious at best. I'm trying to get my head around. Look, this seems like a real simple equation. You have a smoke detector, its function is to detect smoke. Hence, there could be a fire, or there is a fire, and it runs on battery, most of them. And if it's the battery's low, it chirps to notify you to change the battery so that it can continue to function as a smoke detector, Jeff, and actually detect smoke and fire, which could save you and your family's life.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So I think regardless of and this all may be valid. The science behind the problem with people with ADHD or the trauma that poor people, lower socioeconomic status people find themselves in may in fact have some kind of effect on the wiring of the brain, and that may in fact be legitimate. I don't know. But what I do know is that the trauma of being burned alive is going to be quite a bit more significant than the trauma of being poor or the trauma of being of a lower socioeconomic status or in fact your ADHD. When your smoke detector chirps, it lets you know time to change the battery. Easy enough to do. If you ignore it, you're ignoring a signal, a pain signal. We'll call it a pain signal. When you put your hand in a fire, you get a pain signal. When something sharp comes in contact with your flesh, you get a pain signal. When somebody punches you in the face, you get a pain signal. That painful sound coming out of that smoke detector is to make you aware that you need to change the battery to save you and your family from being burned alive.
okay, so let's try this. I get in my car. I don't put on my seatbelt. The seatbelt chime goes off incessantly as I'm driving down the road. I get pulled over. The police officer comes up to the window and says, besides the illegal turn you took, you're not wearing your seatbelt. And I say, wait, my seatbelt. I'm not wearing my seatbelt. And he says, don't you hear the chiming going on and off to warn you that you're driving down the road without your seatbelt, which is required by law in all 50 states, I do believe. Officer, actually, I don't. I have this calamity.
ADHD?
I have ADHD, and I have this calamity that doesn't allow me to process that warning signal the same way that it may process it for you. So don't give me a ticket for not
No.
abiding by, at that instance, the law. The smoke detector thing could even be more egregious because it is, again, well, I guess driving without your seatbelt is theoretically life or death
Society
too.
breaks down when we ignore signals. Regardless of your limitations, regardless of your inabilities, regardless of things that are no fault to yours. Let's say you really do have some sort of physiological problem, but you can't ignore, regardless of your physiological problem, an ambulance blaring its siren on the street, or a fire truck, or a police vehicle. In fact, you would be a danger to the rest of society if you were allowed to ignore the signals to get out of the way, to allow the emergency vehicle to pass. These are there to help us, to save us, to protect us. This is a non-issue, because if you are in your home and you choose to ignore your smoke detector, that's an issue between you and your insurance company. That's not an issue between anybody else. If you don't have
and
insurance,
your local, it's between you and your local burn center. It's a situation between you and
your burn center may want to get involved too. But that's your choice. Ignore it. If it's too painful for you to change your battery, that's fine. We do not need to have sociologists developing theories to explain.
They're dismissing away things under. Well, listen, where is the simple common sense of this? Well,
again, all bodies, regardless, unless again you have some sort of a hardwiring issue, you feel pain. Pain is there to prompt you. Your body has evolved to prompt you to change direction when it feels pain. Do something different. This is an exogenous version of the body signaling pain. The chirp is painful. You need to change your battery to protect you, your family, anybody in your house, your belongings. It's very simple. If you choose to ignore it, that's fine. We don't need a sociological explanation, really an excuse for people ignoring something that they should not ignore.
Well, there's a whole thing of there's a million and one videos on the internet about the people being in Zoom meetings, and people being in classrooms environments on Zoom, and there's a chirp in the background, and all these people are dismissing this way. Oh, just ignore the chirp. And people are like, wait, why would you ignore the chirp if your house catches on fire tonight and you ignored the chirp? Everybody could burn up and die. So it doesn't really make any sense. It's kind of a weird, unexplainable attempt at dismissing sort of illogical behavior that could cause a great. It doesn't make any sense.
I don't care if there's a sociological theory or not. You still should change your battery.
Yeah,
period.
It just ends right there. That's the end of the conversation, right?
So, speaking of hypocrisy, we've all heard of Eric Swalwell and his latest escapades. This one not involving Feng Feng, his famous spy lover, but rather his going on the attack in 2018, Supreme Court Justice, appointed Justice to the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh. And this is what Swalwell had to say.
The more and more cases that are separate and independent that look the same, pretty soon a prosecutor starts to say to a jury, and this is not a jury, but it's allegations that the arrows are pointing in the same direction. And what are the chances that 3 or 4 women independently who never met each other would have similar experiences with one person? So either, Ari, this person committed these horrific acts, or he is the single unluckiest person in the world for these people to conspire and make up lies against him. But it's a very hard case to make, the more allegations that come in.
I mean, Eric Swalwell, let's see. Hopefully he's changed the battery in his smoke detector, because he hasn't changed the battery in his...
Let me tell you what, this guy has a fire going on in his house right now, and he better have a smoke detector working.
He's got a mess on his hands. Sorry, but it couldn't happen.
The hypocrisy of this guy sitting in 2018 assailing Brett Kavanaugh for having all these people coming out of the woodwork to accuse Brett Kavanaugh then of sexual misconduct. And then his saying, it's an odd thing. You have this many people coming out of nowhere in this last minute of his hearing, and all of a sudden, you've got to deal with it, right? This must be true. It would be weird to have all these people saying these things about you if there weren't some validity to them. Well, guess what? All these people are jumping out of the woodwork right now to talk about Eric Swalwell and his sexual misdeeds. We, as the consumers of information out there, should heed his well-discussed advice to recognize that this would be an odd coincidence to have all of these people jumping out of the woodwork to accuse Eric Swalwell of sexual impropriety. while he was a congressman.
Not the first politician whose own words have come back to bite him in the you-know-what.
Yeah.
Funny, because this situation apparently on its face appears to be nuanced in that there's a whole apparatus in California in the governor race, and that they have this sort of very strange primary system where the top two vote getters, regardless of party, end up on the ballot. And right now, the top two vote getters, there's so many Democratic candidates, viable Democratic candidates.
Right. So what you're saying is that in California, in the primary, the lead up to the election itself, the primary, if you have two Republicans at the top of the ticket, or if you have two Democrats or two
the top two vote getters
or whomever, they would be the ones presented on the ballot for voters to vote in the general election.
That's right. And so Swalwell, it's now being said, because there's 5 or 6 different Democrats, they're all splitting the vote, that the two top Republican candidates, Steve Hilton and Tom Steyer, both Republicans, might sneak in and end up as the two highest vote getters because the bottom of the ticket is all divided amongst the Democrats. And all of a sudden, the state of California is picking between 2 Republicans for their governor.
Yeah.
They were calling a week or 2 ago for somebody. Everybody was standing on their toes in the room in the Democratic Party saying, one of you all need, or 2 of you all need to drop out of this race. And nobody was offering. Katie Porter, Swalwell, there's another.
So there's Tom Steyer. I've got a I've got a little list here. I think the issue is that Swalwell, based on what I'm seeing right now, is polling at around 17%. And that's the head, that's the lead. And then right below him is the Republican Steve Hilton, who's at 13%. And so after that is a Democrat, Tom Steyer, and then Chad Bianco, who is a Republican. And then obviously Katie Porter, which we've covered before in a previous podcast. Please go ahead and check that out if you want to find out some interesting things about
apparently
Katie Porter and her temperament.
Apparently, Katie Porter may not have the temperament to be governor.
That's right.
But I think it's interesting, too, stepping back a little bit quickly about those numbers and those percentages you just recited, that who would have thunk that a Republican would be in the top of the candidates in California? It's been a while. Schwarzenegger was pseudo, and the last Republican governor, Pete Wilson, I think, was the last governor of a Republican governor in California. So that's a bit of a quandary already for the state of California, right? Things are so bad with Newsom's exit strategy, heading presumably for the White House. See how that plays out, that things are in such turmoil that the Republican candidates are actually viable in the state of California.
So the thing is, though, Eric Swalwell polling at 17%, you'd think, well, he's a Democrat, right? So he's going to be on top. And then right below him is Steve Hilton, Republican. So that's not a bad thing. You have a Republican and a Democrat in the general election. That's not so bad. But I think what's happening is that folks recognize that Swalwell has got some dirty laundry that he has to sort through. And in the general election, if you had Swalwell there as the Democrat, running for the Democrats, and you had Steve Hilton running for the Republicans, if Swalwell's reputation were so damaged by all of this material that's just now sort of starting to come out, then you just have Steve Hilton who would win by default. There would be no election.
In other words, if this is going to come out, it needs to come out now before the primary.
It needs to come out now.
Get it out of the system, flush it through the system before the primary, because they can't afford to do it if it's a 2-ticket.
Moreover, there's a twofer here. A twofer.
Right.
The twofer is this. Swalwell is controlling 17% of the Democrat vote, essentially. So, or the general vote. So if that were spread over, say, Tom Steyer and Katie Porter, who are the other Democrats, they may have enough to be the top 2 in the primary. And if they're the top 2, then
it eliminates the Republican. It eliminates the Republican.
You're guaranteed a Democrat is going to assume the governorship in
Let's
California.
face it. Can you imagine the clutching their pearls? The left in California must be outside their own skin with the prospects that they not only may not be able to elect a Democrat, they may not be able to vote for a Democrat.
That's right. That's right.
That is a scenario that really speaks volumes to Gavin Newsom's failures as the governor. The taxes and regulation and the homelessness and the crime and the border and the free healthcare.
Wouldn't it help the state though to have a new leadership in there? Now, I think Schwarzenegger was nominally a Republican, but in practice he wasn't really much of a Republican. It would be a good thing to have a guy like Steve Hilton running the state. The state needs some massive changes.
Certainly shaking things up. Yeah, certainly shaking things up.
That's right, because they're spending billions of dollars building a train to nowhere, and that needs to stop. They need to have.
They're also spending billions of dollars, Jeff, sorry to interrupt. They're also spending billions of dollars trying to address the homelessness issue, which has only been worse. They've thrown billions and billions and billions of dollars at the problem, and they've had limited results. And again, I hate to.
And this isn't even scratching the surface of the overall corruption in the state of California.
There's a whole thing going on
regarding all of these hospice centers, the daycares, the Leering centers.
They're saying it's going to be bigger than the Minnesota corruption by a lot.
And so having this is a great opportunity for the maxim that you get the government that you elect is true. And so if you continue to vote for people who are allowing corruption, allowing mismanagement, misuse of money, right, fraud, waste, and abuse, then that's what you're going to get. And
where's the accountability, Jeff? And by the way, that reminds me, we did that episode recently about the Jimmy Kimmel having Gavin Newsom on, and the two of them having this sort of collective moment of bromance, and coming to this proclamation that California was still the greatest state in the country based on exactly what? Certainly not the taxes and the regulation and the small businesses and the homelessness and the crime and sorry, I'm joking.
No, in some ways, what's going on there is sort of like what happened to Mercedes-Benz. When Mercedes was making cars in the 70s and 80s and selling them, in the United States, internationally, these things were over-engineered, well-built. They were built on 25-year life cycles, and people still have them. You'll still see some of these cars driving around today. What happened was that they changed their approach to building cars. They mashed up with Chrysler at some point in the 90s, and they started making cars that were falling apart after 10 years and so forth. And so California but they were selling the cars because they were living off of that reputation.
Yeah. Right.
Well-deserved reputation of building a solid, long-lasting, durable car.
I know you want to finish your point.
California is living off of its reputation of being a place of innovation, a place of good education, a place where people came to really enjoy the lifestyle and the culture of California. Now they're abandoning California en masse because it's all unaffordable. The corruption has overtaken legitimate government in California.
Yeah, the reputation of Mercedes is in doubt, and obviously the viability of the cars, they don't make them like they did, and the reputation of the merchantability is suffered sufficiently.
So now, our last bit of conversation for today, Scott, involves something I think we disagree with about. I think there's going to be some agreement here, but it's a kind of a major disagreement. I think the collapse of the negotiations with Iran, that this is all foreseeable, that it was a fool's errand to try to negotiate with these people and stop the war effort, which allowed them to do something that they haven't been able to do, which is communicate with one another, to regroup, and establish a stronger, perhaps they brought in new armaments, perhaps from China, from elsewhere, perhaps they brought in a new coordinating technology that allows them to communicate better. But now they have some time. They had some time to get their act together instead of Trump doing what he said he was going to do, which was just destroy the country and release it back to the Iranian people.
Well, I think, listen, I think I've subscribed. Donald Trump is obviously has a reputation for being one of the shrewdest negotiators, publicly and privately. He does pride himself on his negotiating skills. I think they are above reproach. His skills, Art of the Deal, the book that so many people is so famous for so many good reasons. And so I think Trump was correct in assuming, hopefully assuming, if that's not an oxymoron, that he could bring the Iranians to the table and convince them that, look, lay it out. Here's the problems. Here's the challenges. Here's what the consequences are going to be if you don't get on board.
So you don't think that they knew what those consequences were? You don't think that they knew what he was asking for on day one when he said, I want them to end their nuclear program?
Well, no, yeah, he laid it out. He told them what he was going to, what he told them how it was going to go. And he wanted to give them an opportunity to explain themselves. Maybe they wanted to shake hands and agree. And so you have to offer people that. You can't assume, in this instance, many of us did, and correctly, that Iran was going to patently reject everything or mostly everything. And so, look, Iran has been stalling for 47 years. They've threatened to eviscerate the United States. They've threatened to eviscerate Israel. And Donald Trump is the lone person in the history of our civilization to stand up to that and finally decide that something has to be done. Now, why did he do that? We don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. It is my assumption, and my assumption perhaps alone, that Trump had intel that something was afoot and something was coming within a few weeks. Now, before you say something about last summer, and
you're calling it an imminent threat, right? You're saying there was an imminent threat.
I am.
What proof do we have that there was an imminent threat?
Well, we don't have much proof, but I think part of the problem, what proof we have, is that based on Trump's behavior, which we can ignore the mainstream media's characterization of said behavior, but based on the true common sense approach, the profile that Donald Trump has maintained throughout his political career is that he doesn't start wars. And I don't think he bolted upright in bed one night and said, you know what, I think it's time to start a war with Iran. I think he decided, based on intel that we don't have and we may never have, but based on intel that a nuclear threat was imminent. I have no evidence of that. I'm going with what I think, what led up to, what precipitated to Donald Trump saying, listen, there is a line in the sand. There's a date. We're coming to get you if you don't acquiesce on your nuclear armaments.
It sounds a lot like the WMD from Bush 43's reign. It's the WMD. Where is the WMD? Never a WMD, right? That was the basis for that war. That was the reason that war took place. And the truth is that the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned of in the 50s has been using that old trope ever since. It's the WMD. It's the imminent threat. And who benefits? Always follow. Whenever something doesn't quite make sense, you hear imminent threat. Okay, where's the evidence? No evidence. What makes sense? It makes sense for the military-industrial complex. Follow the dollars. Who benefits from this war? The military-industrial complex benefits from the war. The world has been pretty, lacking in wars recently, and so they need to make up. Right? So it's like the old...
I don't see it that way. Listen, you and I, heaven forbid, Jeff, that we hearken to Hollywood to find common ground, you and I. You and I both share a strong affinity for the movie 3 Days of the Condor. And one of the takeaways in that film is we don't, there's this whole, it's a fantastic movie, one of the better movies of our generation in the last 50 years. In that movie, the premise, of course, one of the story elements is that, listen, the government's doing things that you wouldn't find that you would like to be behind and support, but you wouldn't care if you knew what the alternative is. We don't care. Fix it, and makes the problem go away.
That's how dictatorships work. That's how communist nations work. That's how socialist nations work. The people are just too stupid to understand.
Let me ask you.
They should never have all full information because they can't handle it. These people are ignorant. They should just be going back to the fields, making sure that we have food to eat. Just don't worry about it. This is for the adults to handle. That is a condescension that's unbelievable. We own this government. They need to be afraid of us.
That's a grossly oversimplification of a very nuanced and complicated equation, but I'll give you that point for the moment. Let me ask you, do you feel like today, right now, 2026, you're living under the attributes of a dictatorship here?
Not at all. No,
Oh,
no.
okay.
I voted for
that-
Trump. I elected Trump. I voted for him.
Okay, good. So that makes sense then. So that argument doesn't hold.
Three times.
Yeah, sure. That's hilarious. Vote often, vote early, vote often. Anyway, so we're in agreement that.
I can criticize Trump though. I don't believe that anybody is beyond criticism. I think that an active citizenship is a citizenship where you engage in the political conversation. And for us to just sit by and just say, "Oh, Trump's got this. He's got my back." No one has your back. No,
I don't think. I'm not. My
Never
position
think
is
that for 10 seconds that Trump has your back.
I don't think my position is not Trump's got my back and it's on autopilot and I don't have to worry about it. What I'm trying to say is something is afoot that we are not privy to for Donald Trump to wake up and launch a war.
But he just launched a war before that. I know you disagree with this, and I think that
you're going to bring up Venezuela.
Going in and taking Maduro and his wife from Venezuela was at least a good thing to do. Venezuela is a corrupt nation. It's been done nothing but harm. But that's a provocation of war. If the Venezuelans had chosen, like the Iranians have chosen, to fight back, then we'd have a war on our hands. There's no doubt about that. Taking a leader of a sovereign nation is by definition war. And so they chose not to have a war with us. Iran has chosen to have a war with us. And there is no real reason. Last summer, Trump stood before the nation and said, "We have obliterated their nuclear capacity."
Wait a second. Let's go to wait. Let's address. They will not have the ability. They will not have the ability to resume their nuclear program, their nuclear ambitions for decades. Well, either he was grossly mistaken or he lied to us. One of the two. It can't be any other way. Okay. So let's go back to Venezuela for a second because you glossed past that point. So the idea that we launched a war or potentially launched a war with Venezuela by plucking its leader from there. Part of the equation, Jeff, of going into Venezuela and taking Maduro and his wife out in the middle of the night, part of that equation is that there will be no war. If there would have been, if Venezuela was capable of fighting back, we may have, in fact, not have done that. The reason we did that, we all know about the alleged drug trafficking involved with Maduro and his family and the and Trump warned him and said, get out. And there was already indictments. They're old indictments. They're indictments before Trump was president, signed against criminal indictments against Maduro. So your characterization that we went in and took a leader of a country is loose at best. What we really went in and we found was somebody that had been indicted and we brought to justice.
So Scott, two points. When do our laws govern the internal operation of
I'll tell you when.
states' laws?
You've asked a question. Let me answer it. I'll tell you when. When said laws affect tens of thousands, if not millions of Americans' lives with the drugs and the illegal activity.
But they're two sovereign states. My point is that the internal laws of drug trafficking and so forth don't apply to, that's international relations then, right? Our law is no longer, subject, because they're not subject to our law.
Right.
They're subject to international law.
Sure.
That's my point. The other point is this. Look, Iran had its leadership decapitated, much like how you just described Maduro and his wife being extracted from that nation. Now, again, I support the Maduro regime change. I support that action. I think it was a very effective action. It's been a corrupt nation, no good. There was no imminent threat, and by the way, there was very little repercussions for doing that. This situation in Iran, we decapitated them. We took their leadership out, yet they're still fighting back. And we've continued to bomb them for 30 days. They're still fighting back. I don't see any evidence. If you show me evidence, a scintilla, I would accept a scintilla of evidence that there was an imminent threat of the United States sovereignty, of the United States government, the United States people from Iran, and I would say, fine, no problem. But without that, lacking that evidence, there's no reason to have done this. Maybe it should be done. Iran has been a thorn in the state of the
it's been more than wait, Jeff.
1979. A thorn.
Just a minute. It's not been a thorn, my friend. It has killed millions of Americans and its own
You're
citizens.
saying that they've killed millions of Americans?
I said, and their own citizens. Combined, the Iranian government over
Well,
the
that's an
course
easy
of the
thing to
last
say. How many Americans have they killed?
if one's too many, so they've killed at least one. And
Okay.
so, how many do they need to get to a number before you're upset about it, or is one enough?
No, not
Okay.
at all. But what's the context of an American being killed? I need to know the case. Give me the case of the one American.
The context is the Iran is the world's number one sponsor of terrorism, and we had the 9/11 acts, we've had attacks on embassies, we've had attacks on the oil tankers. You're familiar with all these things, and so when
but they're not; those aren't all. Saudi Arabia is behind some of that stuff as well.
Okay, so Saudi Arabia. Let's say Saudi Arabia is behind 99% of it. Iran's still behind.
They're not that much.
I know they're not. It's an exaggeration.
I think you've correctly characterized Iran as one of the world's greatest state sponsors of terrorism. There's no doubt about that.
The number one.
Okay. Well, I don't know that.
So,
I'll concede it. I'll concede the point.
Okay, and so one could theorize on the heels of some of the terrorist acts that have been going on that there was another terrorist act in the works. You want your one scintilla of evidence. I don't have it yet. It's coming. There's a reason.
WMD, bro. It's just like that. It's the same thing.
No, it isn't. It's nothing like the WMB. It's such a different time frame and such a different geopolitical picture that the weapons of mass destruction thing is a campfire.
I hold no affinity for Iran. I think Iran is a disastrous country, a scourge on the world.
The government, sure.
The government of Iran.
Yeah, sure.
A disaster. No question about it. So that this is happening, I'm not torn up about. The implications, though, is that this is going to spread and get deeper, and we're going to have to send troops in to actually extract the uranium, the enriched uranium that Trump wants, and deservedly. I think that's his stated goal. He has 3 stated goals. Get rid of the uranium, the enriched uranium, prevent them from having the capacity to make a nuclear weapon. Good. That's a good thing. I like it. To prevent Iran from threatening its neighbors in the region.
Well, what about killing millions of its own citizens? There's that too.
And the third thing is to allow the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow that government. Now, this Iranian regime, the radical Islamic regime that's running the country right now, was not in power before 1979. Prior to that, it was run by a dictator who was friendly to the United States.
Shah,
and
you're talking about
the
Shah.
people, the Shah, and the Shah, actually, women had a lot of rights in that country. Women were not oppressed in that country. The country was actually a good partner in commerce throughout the world. Things were working well. Today, it's the opposite of that, right? People are oppressed there. Human capital can't develop. People don't have an education that not everybody has a right to an education there. So I am not upset about the overthrowing of this government in Iran. But what I am upset about is the claim that it was needed immediately. You have 3 stated goals of Trump's attack, and none of them have been satisfied yet. And this has been over 30 days.
Listen,
and nothing's been achieved.
This tracks back to Obama, who was a globalist and tried to say, and Trump, who was a self-proclaimed and proud of it, being an isolationist, that the U.S. we were going to start serving our own. Listen, I'm pretty sure that I've looked online and that the public sentiment behind the war going on in Iran is actually, the public sentiment is for the war. They support the war, and they're actually supporting the higher prices and the gas prices in lieu of said war, while we seem to clean house with the Iranian government and take out their senior leadership and open the strait and get things tidy in the Middle East. So the logic behind it, you right now you're able to aptly point out that we don't have the real reason Trump went in. I'm saying that we will have that soon or someday, and it will bear out, because Donald Trump doesn't wake up and decide to launch a war against anybody. Donald Trump, is the guy that flies and meets with the families of the dead soldiers. Donald Trump is the guy that makes the phone calls in the middle of the night. He himself personally does this. This is not a person that goes recklessly into war. He understands the gravity of dead men and women and the implications of going and launching a war. So it is based on some of just that alone that I can tell you he had a reason that we aren't hip to, to, that he launched that war. And I think history will show he is the smartest president we've ever had, the cagiest president we've ever had.
Well, we've got to end it there. We will agree to disagree on the need for initiating this war. Thanks for joining us.
Please subscribe. We need subscribers.
We appreciate your attention on this matter. If you have any commentary to provide us, please do so in comments below. Just be civil. We'll see you soon.
Be uncivil, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, Jeff. See you, buddy.